G'day, I'm Luke Bateman, and this is In the Good Books, the podcast where we dive into the most incredible stories ever told and talk about the books which have left a lasting impression on you long after you close the cover. Okay, guys, as I said in episode 1, I really want to hear from all of you. I want to hear from my listeners. I want to hear about the stories and just little moments that never get told or no one will ever know about. I want to hear about them, and I want to hear about them here, and I want you to send them in. So I really want you to send in audio and send that to goodbooks@9.com.au. Today we will be talking about the 3 books that changed my life, and truly I say this all the time, books change lives. And there was a time in my life where I was in a really bad place, actually, and I was really struggling, and I had a lot of pain inside of me. It was books that gave me the tools to work my way out of that area of my life, and books truly changed my life, and they saved my life in many ways, and I wouldn't be the person that I am now sitting here talking to you all if it wasn't for books and it wasn't for the impact that they've had on my life. So I want to talk about 3 books that are just so special to me, and the place that they have in my journey and the place that they have in my life and in my heart, and why they mean so much to me and why they were so important to me when they entered my life. Now, to make you understand what this book means to me and what this book did for me, I probably have to dive a little bit into my own story first. And so in 2019, I was suffering from depression, addiction, and I would say I was just in just a place of absolute misery and sadness. And there were, multiple times where I would wake up of a morning and just cry in bed and not see any light at the end of the tunnel. And I was in a really dark place with no hope. And that led me on a journey that would span the next 2 years. And I found myself at rock bottom, and it was my mum, actually. My mum sent me some books because she knew what a bad place I was in, and she was living in a different city from me. And I think that she felt quite helpless. But what she did was she sent me some books. And when my journey of recovery started, and my journey of, as I'd say, self-growth and self-exploration and self-development began, it was at the end of 2019 and the start of 2020 when I finally accepted help, and I finally started to invest in myself and want to change my life and change the direction of what was happening, because I was truly at a place where I was just so broken. And I was such a bag of bones as a person. I was just a bag of bones wrapped in skin, moving through the world every day, where I had no intentionality. I wasn't present. I was just checked out of life completely, because it was the only way that I really knew how to survive. And I was on autopilot, and I just was playing a character every day just to try and survive. And it was horrible, and really sad. And as I said, many tears were shed during that time, but it got to the point where I knew wholeheartedly in myself that there was 2 options left for me, and that was, this goes one of 2 ways. And there's an old saying which I love, and it says, if you get on the wrong train, get off at the next stop. For the longer you stay on it, the more expensive the return trip will be. And I truly had ridden that train to the very end of the track. There was absolutely nothing left. The only thing left for me was I either ended up in a coffin, or I changed my life. And it was a very, very expensive return trip for me, but I think it was paid for by books. And truly each stop along the way, or along the return journey for me, was a different book. And these are the 3 books along that return journey that, were really fundamental for me and mean so much to me and stick with me still to this day. So book number 1 is The Happiness Trap by Dr. Russ Harris. And I first read this book in the start of 2020 when the journey home began. This was probably I would actually say this was the very first self-development book that I ever read. And it was the foundation and the catalyst for what began a really, really lifelong journey that I'm still on now. But this was stop number one on the return journey. And The Happiness Trap is such a fantastic book. And in it, there's a couple of different concepts, but the ones that resonated for me and the ones that were the initial building blocks of me putting my life back together and putting my soul back together were, it's really big on defining that emotions are things we feel and not things that we are. And being able to feel emotions and separate ourselves from those emotions is what I learned through this book. And we can feel these big emotions, but know that they don't need to control our day or our lives or control our decisions. And that was huge for me, because when I was feeling really sad, or when I was feeling really depressed, or a lot of anxiety, a lot of angst, it gave me the awareness and the tool to be able to separate myself from that emotion and still be able to choose, a good direction, a positive direction, and still keep taking steps ahead even when I didn't feel good. And The Happiness Trap is very big on defining your life by values and not goals. And it basically, teaches you to define what your values are and live your life towards your values and not towards your goals, because goals are fleeting and, you can fail at goals. But if you're living to your values and you're making choices that align with your values, then whatever decisions you make or whatever actions you take off the back of that, like, they're going to be aligned, and you're going to feel good and you're going to feel positive about the results of that. Even if you fail, if what you did is align with your values, then you will still be happy with the end result. And that was so massive for me, because I had never, ever before, I'd never sat down. I did not know what I got out of bed for. And it was so important for me to define what my values were and actually know what I stood for, because before that, I didn't even know what I stood for in life. I was just, meandering through life, just wayward, and just things would just come to me and I would just sort of take them as they came. And I never was very intentional about what my values are, what decisions I needed to make in line with those values, and how to create a life of value instead of just a life of wayward decisions. And the other thing in The Happiness Trap that was huge for me was the ACT framework. And ACT is ACT. And as I said before, that's accept your emotions, choose a value direction, and take action. And that for me was just at that time in my life, at the beginning of 2020, when I was very first beginning my recovery journey and trying to heal myself as a human, being able to split myself from my emotions and choose actions that align with my values was just so huge for me, and allowed me to take the initial steps on my journey back to integration and back to wholeness. And it's just such a beautiful book. And as I said, it means the world to me, that book, because it was the very first self-development book I ever read, and truly the book that started my return journey, despite the expensiveness of it. And the second book that changed my life is Magician by Raymond E. Feist. Now, to tell you what position or place this book has in my life, I once again need to touch back on my own journey. And in 2021, I'd been 12 or 18 months sort of working on myself, and it had been anybody who's, worked on themselves or been in recovery or tried to heal knows that it's never a linear process. And my journey to that point had been, it had been quite zigzagged and stop-start, and 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps back, 1 step forward. And it had been slowly getting better, but I got to the point where I've been going well for a little bit, and then I fell off the wagon again. And I got to a place in my life where I'd had floated to me from the people around me multiple times about going to rehabilitation, and I'd always been so resistant to it. Like, I was always just so certain that I didn't need rehab, and that, I was so wrapped up in this shame and fear and secrecy. And I knew that if I went to rehab and people found out that I'd been to rehab, then all of my shame and all of my fear, like, that would all be aired publicly. And people that I knew, people that I've been keeping all these secrets from, and people that I've been keeping everything so private from, they would find out about it and they would judge me, and then they would see me as less. And I just always resisted it so strongly because I was so scared of what people around me would think. And I had such a solid ego construct around me that I was this, impressive man and this successful man, and that I didn't have any issues, and I was someone that people looked up to and someone that aspired to be. And if I went to rehab and I admitted that I had all these massive problems, I felt like I would be fake, and I felt like everyone around me would see the real me, and the lifetime I'd spent building this reputation and building this ego around me of this successful and looked up to person, that would all come crumbling down. And then who would I be? Who would I be without that? So, but I finally got to the point where I had just had so much of pain and so much misery and so much sadness, and I just got to the point where I think the pain of continuing this way was much more than the pain of people seeing me for who I really was. And so I went to my mum and I said to her, it's time, like I need to go to rehab. So I went and spent a month in a rehabilitation facility, and that was the most humbling and life-changing experiences of my life. And I truly credit it for making me into the man I am today. And when you are in there surrounded by many people who are, I would say, quite shunned by society, and they are your fellows and your friends and your peers, it really brings you back to a point where you go, well, who is Luke Bateman without everything that he had to be? Who is Luke Bateman without the success? Who is Luke Bateman without the reverence? And who is Luke Bateman without people looking up to him? And it just humbled me. And when I come out of rehab, I was so ready to return to the person that I was before everything. And I was a person who loved books and loved reading, and reading had really fallen out of my life during the years of depression and during the years of addiction. And I was just so invigorated to find that person again. And Magician was the very first high fantasy book I read when I got out of rehab. And I don't think I try not to be a woo-woo person, but I feel like the universe just times things for you. And that book was the perfect book for that moment of my life. And that story, when that story found me, like that was the exact story that I needed in my life. And it's a epic quest, and it follows these young boys through hardships into, really finding out who they are and discovering their own magic and discovering their own power in the world. And that just it paved the pathway for me to see how that was possible, and see how, despite hardship and despite failure and despite struggles, that I could discover my own magic and really become, a whole person that actually is looked up to for the right reasons. So that book not only gave me the pathway back to myself and allowed me to walk that pathway and pick up all the younger versions of me that I discarded along the way, and those young versions of me who just love magic and love dragons and love magicians and loved epic quests, all those pieces that I discarded because, the world told me that they weren't allowed. It gave me the pathway back to myself, and it gave me the pathway to pick them up along the way and hold their hands and bring them with me. And I just love that story and that book so much for what it means to me in that moment of my life, and how it reconnected with me, with myself, and with all the younger versions of myself, to integrate back into a man that, loves magic and just loves stories as well. I do believe I heard Richard Schwartz on a podcast, because I started listening to podcasts about, psychology and healing. And I heard Richard Schwartz on a podcast. And for those of you who don't know who Richard Schwartz is, he's an American psychologist or psychotherapist. Don't quote me on that. And he developed the framework of internal family systems. And internal family systems, or IFS, is the most life-changing framework and psychological modality that I've ever come across. And truly, the thing that changed my life on a dime and catapulted me back into health and health and wellness and happiness and joy. And the book of his that I first read was You Are the One You've Been Waiting For. And I say that it was 3 books that changed my life, but I probably think of these 2 books as one book. And You Are the One You've Been Waiting For and No Bad Parts by Richard Schwartz. 2 books I read back to back, and they both cover IFS and they both explain IFS to you, but I read them together and they feel like one book to me. But those 2 books changed my life. And IFS basically is a framework where you sit with yourself and you look inward and you turn inward, and it talks about the fact that we all have these exiled parts of ourselves, and they are usually younger versions of ourselves that we've exiled because we feel shame or guilt or fear around them. And these exiled parts of us have protectors, and those protectors are the behaviors and the emotions and the outbursts that show up in moments. And they're the unexplainable things that happen to us when we have a really severe reaction or a severe emotion to something and we can't describe it. That's actually the protector of our exile stepping in. And our exiles are just these beautiful little parts of ourselves that really just want to be heard and want to be connected, and they want something great for us, and the protectors are making sure that they don't get hurt. And understanding that within myself was just so game-changing, and understanding that my behaviors and my addiction and all the sadness and all the shame and fear and guilt were just things that were trying to protect these parts of me that I'd really discarded, that just wanted to be heard and wanted to have their day in the sun and just be seen and heard by me. And that gave me the ability to do it. And it's really, I'm going to try not to choke up here, but I was literally just on the phone with my mum last night, and we were talking about reading and writing, and my mum said to me, she said, and so many times when I was really struggling, my mum said to me, and I was in a bad place, my mum said to me, she said, I just want my little boy back. And and we were on the phone talking last night, and Mum said to me, she said, "Oh, do you remember when I said to you all those times, like, I just wanted my little boy back?" And I said, "Yeah, Mum, of course I remember," because it was obviously quite hurtful at the time. But I said, "Yeah, Mum, of course I remember." And she said, I have that boy back now. And it just, that book was those books were the books that gave me the tools and the framework to find the little boy again and come back to him. Anyway, stop crying for a bit. And yeah, so those books, those 2 books by Richard Schwartz were the 2 books that gave me the ability to rediscover truly who I am, and then that little boy that my mum loved. And she said something funny to me that I just loved. She said, my brother Sam, she said, if there was a 6-inch fence in front of Sam, he would say, that's there to keep me out. And she said, if there was a 6-meter wall in front of you, Luke, you said, that's something that I need to get in. And she said, like, you were just always so inquisitive and just so interested and just wouldn't let anything stop you. And she said, I see that in you now. I see that all again. So those 3 books are the 3 books that gave me the ability to find that inquisitiveness again and find the wonder and the magic back inside myself and reconnect to who I am, and really start such a beautiful journey for me that's been so fulfilling and so just brings me so much joy, being able to live very authentically and not be able to, or not have to wear masks and have an ego construct around myself anymore, because I know who I am. And it was because of those books that I was able to find that boy again. Okay, now that I've regathered myself and wiped the tears away from my eyes, thank you first of all for listening to that and allowing me to share such a deep and vulnerable part of myself. But again, I just really want to re-emphasize how deeply I want to hear from all of you. And I want to hear the books that, helped change your life and helped save your life and helped you rediscover your own magic and helped you rediscover those younger versions and those authentic versions of yourself. So please, please, please send in your audios and send them in with as much vulnerability and as much depth and as much detail as possible, because I want to hear them. I'm sure that there will be other people that can hear them and listen to them, and it will help change their lives too. So send those audios into goodbooks@9.com.au, and I cannot wait to hear them. I can't thank you enough for joining me on this episode of In the Good Books. It was a deep one, it was a vulnerable one, and it was a very emotional one for me anyway, but it was awesome. I loved it so much. I'm so glad that you were joining me for that journey. And I'm just, once again, so overjoyed to be able to talk about magic and words with more and more people. I'll be genuinely grateful if you'd subscribe to In the Good Books by hitting the follow button in your podcast app. I look forward to the next chapter.